No one line for the sneaking around. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for taking time to be here tonight. We're joined by attorney Mike Andriana.
Good evening.
Mike is a partner with Pullman and Conley, the town's municipal council, but he also, first of all, he sits on the board of directors for the Connecticut Main Street Center, and was involved in the drafting, I think principally involved in the drafting of the statute that we're going to talk about tonight, which is a concept that I've been interested in for a really long time, but it's a little bit scary. And it's a little bit scary because it has tax in the title. It's called tax increment financing, and it sounds like it should be something that people should be scared of, but in reality, it's been a pretty successful economic development tool in municipalities around Connecticut. The most obvious example is the Montgomery Mill building in Windsor Locks. That was done through a TIF arrangement. So this is it's an informational opportunity just to kind of learn what this is and start thinking about how, if at all, this may be appropriate here in East Windsor. So Attorney Andriana, thank you for taking the time to be with us, and the floor is yours.
Sure. Thank you, Jason. Thanks for everyone coming tonight. I'm going to start off with kind of what I guess I would call kind of a TIF 101 presentation, and the hope is that once I'm done, or even in the middle, if you have questions, we can start a discussion, and hopefully I can provide some answers to your questions for tonight. So just to give you a little background, Jason gave you a little background who I am. This new TIF statute was enacted back in 2015. If anyone cares, it's Chapter 105B of the Connecticut General Statutes. The reason it came around, Connecticut has actually had TIF legislation on the books for a long time, probably 30, 40 years. And up until this legislation, it really wasn't used that much. And I think some of the reasons that it wasn't used was that the old statute required sign off from the state, and it also basically required the municipality to take 100% of the incremental tax revenues, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, and use them for the project. The advantages of the new legislation is it's totally local. Okay, so all we're talking about are local real property taxes. So the state's not involved at all. If the town decides to do it, you can do it. Second thing is the new legislation gives you a lot more flexibility as to what percentage of the incremental real property taxes that the town wants to use, say, to support either public infrastructure or private infrastructure within a TIF district. It can take a portion of the incremental taxes and put it into the general fund, and then use the other remaining portion for projects within the district. And it's much more flexible in the type of projects that tax increments can finance. So that's a little background, just so you know. As Jason pointed out, Windsor Locks has used this legislation. They have actually 3 TIF districts. Enfield has 2 TIF districts. Windsor has a TIF district. It's become fairly popular, I'd say in the probably last 5 years, even 3 to 5 years, as more towns have taken advantage of it. It is, at the bottom line, it's another economic development tool for the town. And it's something that even if you adopt what is called the TIF master plan, the town never has to use it. There's no requirement, because at the end of the day, if you're providing some sort of tax incentive or tax benefit, I mean, it needs to make sense for the town. Either it's the project wouldn't have happened without it, or there's a good reason and a driving reason to bring that type of project into town. So that's a little bit of the background. To get into the details, just to start off, kind of what is tax increment financing? Really all it is, and I think the first thing that's really important, and this is the point Jason made, it is not a new tax. It is not an additional tax on any property owner. All it is that it's a mechanism that allows you to use additional incremental property taxes that arise just because the assessed value of a piece of property increases because of new development. So given the kind of the simplest example, if you have a piece of property that is, assessed and generating $100 of property taxes, if there is additional development on that property, and now the property taxes go up to $1,000, that $900 delta is what's considered the incremental real property taxes. And that's what's available to be used under this statute. So it's not layering another tax on top of it. And it's if you don't increase your assessed value, you're not going to generate any incremental property tax. So it's important to remember that incremental property taxes aren't generated in the case where the assessment stays the same, but the mill rate goes up. That's not an incremental property tax. What we're trying to encourage here is additional development, increasing the grand list, growth, those types of things. And so that's kind of what tax increment financing is. If you flip to page 3, I think this is a good kind of visual example. And this is kind of important to remember is, like my example, the piece of property that was generating $100 of taxes in the beginning, that $100 is always going to the town. And it will always, go into the general fund. Again, it's only the delta, that 900 that's generated because of the increased assessment. That tax increment, that's the blue in the example. And that's what's, again, available that can be used to help fund, say, public infrastructure requirements that a project requires. If the town decides, it could go and fund, private development costs. We'll get into, and there's a page here that shows the variety of costs it can be used for. And the other thing to remember, and I think this is a good example too, is that these tax increment arrangements, they're always a period of time. They don't last forever. First of all, under state statute, you can't create a tax increment district that can last more than 50 years. You can pick anything under 50 years. Again, that's up to the town. Most towns I've dealt with have usually gone in the 20 to 30 year range, but you can go up to 50. And any type of arrangement that you strike, say with a property owner who's doing any type of major development, again, you can set the time period. So this increment that might go back to the developer to help pay for some costs, that might only last 10 years. And then after year 10, all of the taxes, again, using my example, the $1,000 of taxes that are now generated because of this increased development, after the expiration of kind of the tax increment deal, the full $1,000 would then go back to the town to be used in the general fund. So it's a period of time.
So that's what this is. The blue is indicating the benefit to the developer or the development. And
Exactly.
the green is the local tax revenue. So at the
Yes.
expiration of the term, we get the whole thing.
Exactly. And it's there because the assessed value of the properties increase. Again, because it's not the additional tax that goes away, it's there forever. And it's just who and how that can be used. To get a little, there's a lot of comparisons between tax increment financing and tax abatements. And in some ways they're similar, but there are some differences. In the tax abatement, typically a property owner gets a deal and the property taxes are reduced. So the property owner might be paying 75% of what the normal tax for a piece of property where that assessed value is paid. In a TIF deal, the property owner is always paying 100% of the property taxes. And then the way the TIF works is once the town receives that money, depending on the deal that is struck, a portion of the incremental property tax then can go back toward public infrastructure, towards the development itself. So what's important there is, one, every deal I've worked on basically says that the property owner has to pay 100%, and if they don't pay 100%, they don't get any benefit. So by requiring that, you make sure you get your kind of original taxes that were coming before the development occurred, and that will continue to go in the general fund. And then you're getting 100% of the increment, so you're making sure that the portion of the incremental taxes that aren't going to the development are coming into the town. So that's a little different. And the other thing that, depending on the arrangement you can make, under state law, you can make an arrangement with a property owner for up to 50 years. I haven't seen a deal for 50 years with a property owner yet. Most of them are in the 10-year range. There are a few. I had one where the property owner got a TIF arrangement, what we call a credit enhancement agreement, for 30 years. So it depends. Again, there's so much flexibility that is left to the town to decide what makes the most sense for this kind of deal. And when I talk about the town deciding, first thing that's important, town like East Windsor, where the town meeting is the legislative body, this TIF plan, the original plan that has to be approved before anything else can happen, would be approved at the town meeting level, either at a town meeting, or if decided, it could be moved to a referendum vote. So the taxpayers, the voters have some say.
So on that, who develops the TIF plan? Is that something PCC does? Is that something we have a consultant with? How is that developed?
Typically what would happen if the decision would be to go forward with this, to put the plan together. What I've typically seen is that the town itself would almost create like an ad hoc subcommittee that would typically, in your case here, probably include representatives from the Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance. I think it's critical in all these to have the assessor involved and on board early, because at the end of the day, the increment is generated by changes in assessed value. It's the assessor that's going to need to know that. Also the taxpayer, because as you go on, as money comes in, if some of that money will need to be segregated to kind of go back to the development, you can have P&Z people involved, Economic Development Commission people involved. I've seen some towns have drafted the plans themselves. Some towns hire a consultant. I will tell you now that there are enough out there that have been adopted, and the plans are fairly cookie cutter. It's kind of fill in the blanks for each of the towns. I'm quite confident that town like East Windsor, you could put the plan together. So and that kind of develops over time. I would say that to put the plan together, kind of figuring out what the town needs and what the town wants, is probably, best case 2 to 3 month scenario if you decide you're going to work on it.
So in the scheme of things, it's quick.
Yeah. The other nice thing about what this TIF legislation can do, and this was probably one of the biggest reasons why the old legislation didn't catch on, was the old way, like the classic TIF project is someone says, I have, a $20 million development project, And because of that, it's going to need some public infrastructure, whether it's traffic, whether it's bringing water, or sewer to whatever. The old way was that the town would issue what you would call TIF revenue bonds. And they would be out there and the town would say, well, we're going to repay these when we generate this incremental tax to pay it back. So the town was basically taking on the construction risk. So if the developer never built it, you're never going to get the incremental tax revenues. You're never going to get the source to repay the debt. And you're going to have very angry bondholders who, even though you say in the disclosure document that the town is not on the hook, you know, who do they know? It's still going to be East Windsor TIF revenue bonds. They're going to come knocking on your door if it's not paid. What this allows you to do is basically says, and I've done this and I've represented developers, basically says the town will say, you finance or you pay for the public infrastructure improvements up front. And then once you build your $20 million development, those taxes come in, we'll give enough taxes back to you over a certain period of time to basically repay you for the cost. So the town then shifts the construction risk. You get a property owner then that's very motivated because if they've laid out a lot of money up front for public infrastructure improvements, they're really going to work on getting the development done that's going to generate the taxes that's going to repay them. So that's a nice thing about this legislation. Go to page 5. It lists different types of costs that you can finance. So we've talked about a lot about you know, particular kind of development projects on, say, a particular parcel. But that's not all it does. I'll give you an example, like New Britain created a TIF district for basically their entire downtown, probably 200 different parcels. And really what their plan was not so much to use TIF to fund kind of one-off projects, but to take the tax increment revenues that would accrue over time because of increased development in the downtown area, put it in a fund that's controlled by the town, and then use that fund. They've used that fund for like downtown sidewalk improvements, downtown facade improvements. I think they're in the process of creating, and this is all permitted by the statute, basically a revolving loan fund so that property owners within the downtown TIF district can effectively borrow from this city TIF fund for improvements to their parcel and then repay it, and then, you know, that grows. So there's a whole bunch of things you can do with it. You can, you know, use it for marketing assistance within the district. It basically can be used for almost anything you can think of. The statute's very broad. It's a question.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding. So one of the things that because we've kind of talked about this and when something like this would make sense. And one of the things we can't do with a TIF is basically decrease the upfront costs of a development, right? If someone is saying because of construction costs right now, they don't have that particular financing, you can't use a TIF to reduce those startup costs, or can you?
You can. There's two ways. One, I would never recommend you doing. Two, I've seen it done, and Montgomery Mill is a perfect example. The one way would be the old way, which would be the town issue TIF revenue bonds up front, generate a source of cash, basically turn it over to the developer to use for the project, whether it's public infrastructure, private costs, and then hope that the developer finishes the project and it generates the TIF revenues to pay that back.
That's the don't do it way.
I wouldn't recommend that. The other way, which is what Montgomery Mill did, is they entered into an agreement with the developer of the mill, Beacon, which said, once you build it, will for 10 years give you a percentage of the incremental tax revenues that were generated. Beacon was able to take that agreement with the town and basically use it as collateral to get an upfront loan to help with their development costs. So it is possible. I have another developer client that basically, it wasn't specifically pledged towards collateral for their bank loan, but they took a bank loan to finance the upfront public infrastructure improvements that was going to be needed for their project, knowing that they had this agreement in place that would basically allow them to get the money back to repay the debt for that public infrastructure. So there are ways to do it. Yep.
I'm a little confused on the concept of a district. When you talk about Montgomery Mill, you're talking about a parcel.
Yep.
When I think of a district, I think of Broadbrook or Warehouse Point.
Yep.
So anytime a homeowner in the district makes an improvement to their house and takes out a building permit, their assessment goes up. So would that go into the TIF fund that then?
If that homeowner was within the district and the town decided that that's what it was going to do, right? That it was going to say, take a percentage of these incremental taxes that, I'll be honest, in the case of a homeowner who gets a building permit that, say they're going to redo their basement or put an addition on, or,
A shed or whatever.
right. In the scheme of things, that's not going to generate that much in incremental taxes, but it could go into this fund that the town could use. When I talk about a district, there are a few things. A district, the town creates the district. The town decides what properties are within the TIF district. It could be a single parcel, and I've done deals with it's just one parcel because some developer wanted to build some big development there, and that's how the town was going to help. It could be hundreds of parcels, like the New Britain example. The only restrictions are, and this is in the statute, is that when you create a TIF district, all of the property within all of your TIF districts, and you can have more than one, there's no limit on how many you can have. All of the properties within your TIF districts can't be more than 10% of the overall taxable assessed value in the town. So I think in the example you give, knowing the town, I think, creating a TIF district for all of Broadbrook or all of Warehouse Point, my guess is you'd probably blow past that 10%.
But we could do the Warehouse Point Village and
Yes,
sections of Route 5, so long as we didn't cross the 10%.
yeah, yeah.
And I think I know the answer to this, and I didn't want to step on your punchline, but can you have one TIF that is in non-contiguous as well as multiple TIFs that are disassociated? For example, could I put the East Windsor Park in a TIF with the Warehouse Point Village, which are on geographically opposite sides of town? Could they be in the same TIF?
I've never had that question come up, to be quite honest. Everyone I've done is contiguous. I'm trying to think, I have to take a look at that, but.
So the takeaway is that's not what you've seen done.
Right.
Right.
My guess would be you'd keep them contiguous and just do multiple TIFs. Because the other thing, when you create, in fact, I just did this in Bloomfield, they adopted one TIF plan, but within that TIF plan, there were 3 separate TIF districts within town. So that cut down on the work a little bit and cut down on the cost a little bit. Because the other thing you can do within each TIF district, you can have like different rules. You could say in one TIF district, the town's going to keep 50% of the incremental real property taxes and make the other 50% available to, development within that district. In another district, say it's a single parcel district where you have a property owner that comes in and has a plan and knows exactly what it wants, but says, look, the only way I'm gonna build this is if I get, for X number of years, this percentage of the incremental taxes, and that might be different than 50%, and that's okay. So you can cut different deals in different districts, and even within a district for specific property owners, you can have different deals. So again, a lot of flexibility.
And are those deals then say, public? Because the plan is adopted.
The
by
plan is,
town.
and typically what the plan would say is that what we call a credit enhancement agreement, which is an agreement between the town and the property owner, say who's doing, those are typically approved, I would say here in East Windsor, like at the Board of Selectmen level. In other towns, it's like the town council level, and those would be public because that would be adopted at a Board of Selectmen meeting within the parameters of the plan. And typically when a municipality adopts a TIF district plan, it will also adopt like tax increment financing policies, like what are your parameters? Like what I would say, and what's a typical one is so these credit enhancement agreements that maybe provide money back to a specific property owner that's developing its property and increasing the assessed value. You're going to want to probably put a minimum dollar level because to be fair, you don't want every property owner within a district that's say redoing their basement to come to the town and say, I want a break. So a lot of times we'll say, look, the project cost has to be, each town can pick a number. Maybe it's $1 million or something. Projects that are going to make a difference in town. That's where you want to provide the incentive. So you have things like that within your policy and different things like that. And how typically there's an application process for a property owner with a credit enhancement agreement. And the process that goes to get approved. Usually at that level, you're dealing with the planner, and it eventually gets up to the Board of Selectmen for approval, different things like that. Did you have a question here first?
Well, clarification and a question, I guess. From as good as some other people in the room, but St. Louis Farm Village over here in town.
Yep.
We get wind that they're going to do major renovations to that property. We can develop with everybody's approval a TIF district, correct? Or
Yeah.
Expansion.
Yeah.
We can only get up to 10% of the increased value to put it into this TIF fund.
Not for that particular project. You could get 100%. The 10% is
10%
when
only.
you look at.
It's 10% of the value of the grand list.
Yes.
10%, okay, I
Okay.
misunderstood that, that's,
Yes.
okay, so that's clarification.
Yeah.
All right, and then that money that goes into the TIF account for that district, I guess is what
Yeah.
we're gonna call it, TIF district, money then can only be used if they need to borrow for improvements, or can it be used for the outer perimeters, or am I getting ahead of myself?
No, that's.
Or the outer perimeters, like the sidewalks, the road, entrance, or whatever.
It can be
That
used
could be
for
used
any cost within that district, or the statute does provide for costs outside the district, but that are critical to the
To that
development of the district. So if you had a piece of vacant land that was, maybe landlocked or whatever, and you need to build a road that actually started outside that district, that would be covered.
Okay,
Things
so
like
then
that.
my next question would be then, so we'll use your analogy. So today, no pond is paying $100.
Yeah,
They do their renovations and now they have to pay $1,000. that 900 is gonna go in there. But in doing that for that district, I'm taking $900 away from the non-TIF districts, which means that possibility that their taxes are gonna go up because we're not pulling in the revenue that we used to pull in.
No, you always, so, and this is very important, let's think about that. So in the example, so before the development, Mill Pond was generating $100
Yeah.
in tax. And that, you know, the town with those $100 was paying, you know, covering all its expenses. Now with the development, these are new taxes in the sense
Yeah.
that they weren't there before. So $900 of new taxes. So the $100 keeps going to the town. So the town's total tax is the same. And it's only these new taxes which are generated by the
But
development.
that new tax normally would go to the fund
Right,
that we would then take that increment and say, hey, these are our expenses, this is what our
Right.
revenue coming in, and the difference is what we're gonna tax people. Well, now we're not gonna have that additional $900.
Well, the other thing to consider, and I think Mike pointed to this, is that that would only be true if you dedicated 100% of the new revenue back into the district, which that's a negotiation point where we wouldn't need, if we could say they're gonna get half. So you have your $100, we get another 450 to the town, and the development gets 450 to pay off their construction bill.
right.
Is that right?
And that is, I've never seen a deal where 100% of the increment went back to say a project, you know. Some are 50%, and I would recommend this because with any new development, there's gonna be some
Right.
incremental costs that can generate for the town, depending what it is. If it's, you know, if it's multifamily apartments, then you might have additional kids coming into school. So the town should take a portion of that increment to help pay for that. Public safety, you know, different public works things that might be. So it is, I think the important thing to remember is what we're talking about with TIF all the time are taxes that weren't there before the development. And the idea kind of is if without this incentive, those taxes might never come to the town. So and I think Jason gives a good example. In this case, would it be worth it for the town if the increase is $900 to provide $450 back towards the project, and now they're getting $450 of additional tax that they weren't getting before because they didn't have the development before. And again, the thing to remember is that the $450 going back to the development is for a fixed period of time, might be 10 years. And then after 10 years, $900 in our example, we'll come back to.
So because of the money that goes into the TIF fund is based upon improvements, do monies generated from just your standard 10-year revaluation, right? The town is a reval and property values generally go up 5%. Those assessments go into that fund as well?
Yeah, so, right, so the reval is always a tricky question because, so if revals go up, then the assessed value goes up. So under the statute, then that would be considered incremental taxes because it's an increase in the assessed value.
I see in the note here, it says maximum amount or percentage to TIF revenue. So would part of the master plan say include a cap? So if for some reason you got more than that balance would go into the general fund?
You could do that. You could do that. You could put a cap on the total amount of dollars coming in. Again, the plan, complete flexibility. It's really up to the town what it wants to do.
So for something that was longer in duration beyond the 10-year, reval being every 10 years, if there was concern that properties in that area would have an increase in that assessment, you could build something like that in so that upon reval, you're not all of a sudden flooded with stuff not being routed to the general fund.
Right, yeah. No questions? So I'm just kind of flipping along and I appreciate the questions and you know, we covered a lot of this. So page 6, Jason's on it, you know, various uses for the TIF revenues. And this is what, you know, a portion of the increment, as we said, could be decided, and it typically is, would go back into the town general fund to help pay for government services. We talked a little bit about municipal revenue bonds.
You're saying that's a bad idea.
When I'm representing the municipality, I don't recommend that. When I represent the developer, I say, well, that's a good idea. No, I don't. It hasn't happened. It hasn't happened. And there's too many other ways that the developers can use this, that the idea of issuing municipal revenue bonds really never comes up. And most towns are basically strictly saying it's not going to happen. We're going to have to find another way to make it work. But the debt service on developer debt, I've seen that, and you know, for a municipality that does make sense because the developer, you know, you're having the developer incur the upfront costs, and that's really what we want. And then the last one is kind of the pay as you go. You know, I think New Britain is the best example of this. This is just money. The increment comes in, a percentage of the increment come in, it goes into this town fund. And then the monies in there are used for various kind of typically district-wide type of programs.
So I don't know what made me think of this, but it's somewhat on point, I guess. The New Britain thing is an example. So if we were to draw a TIF around the Warehouse Point Village,
Yeah.
where we've done a specific redevelopment study, but we extend that to also include the site that was supposed to be the casino site. It's currently undeveloped, barren, basically barren.
Right.
And something were to get developed there, and now all of a sudden, we're beyond that 10% of our grand list number. How does that affect? So if we're at 9.5, and then the growth. turns into
Okay,
a
so
1.
the 10% is measured at the time the TIF districts are done.
Okay, all right. thank you.
So you're fine there. So you just need to make sure up front. I mean, the hope would be that you establish one of these TIF districts that promotes a lot of development, and that, you know, maybe you do get above the 10% because of the increased development, but.
So that has been considered in.
Yeah, and it's very clear in the statute.
Thank you.
That's how that's happened.
So keep in that scenario that he saw about the casino.
Yeah.
Let's just assume, and it's just something, you know, it's never gonna happen, but that property, if the casino was to come in and decide to put their casino there, and say they offered us $2 million, whatever the agreement was, that could all go into the TIF fund?
So you're saying, so like a payment in lieu of a tax. That we'd have to look at. I think there'd be an argument that if it was a negotiated payment in lieu of a tax, we could still count it as an incremental tax here that could go in. I mean, you could, if you're getting a payment in lieu, something like that, you could decide what to do with that money as well. But because it's really not.
Tax rate.
Yeah. So we have that, just flipping to page 7. You know, we've talked about this. We've talked about preparing the TIF district master plan. I apologize here now, I see, it shouldn't be mayor, it should be board of selectmen, economic development, finance assessor, tax collectors, consultants, 10% test. It does need to go, the plan, once you kind of have a near final form, it does need to go to the local planning agency, whether it's planning and zoning, and you just need to get an opinion from the planning and zoning that the TIF district master plan is consistent with the town's plan of conservation and development.
And that would be a local referral or just to product?
No, that's local. It's local. You do have a public hearing. You have to have at least one public hearing. I recommended to towns where it's their first time through doing TIF, might make sense to have probably one official public hearing, but have more informational meetings like this, because it's a tricky subject, and my experience has been the initial reaction is that, well, if I'm in a TIF district, then my taxes are going to go up. And that's definitely not the case. Because if you're in a TIF district, but your assessed value, or regardless, your taxes won't be any different than what they would be if there was no TIF district. It's just how that increment is. And then ultimately, at the end, once we go through all these steps, it would go to a town meeting vote for approval. The statute lays out specifically in fairly decent detail as to what needs to be in your TIF plan. Obviously, one of the most important things is figuring out what's your district, what are the actual boundaries of your district, what properties are included. And then kind of more detail as to the types of things that need to go in there. One thing here on this page, page 8, is, well, two things, the last two things. It's not mandatory, but it's permitted to, you can establish like a TIF district advisory committee. And there's no requirement as to what the makeup is of that committee. It, you know, can be, it probably would be best if it was a combination of, you know, town and municipal officials, but also probably property owners within the district who want some say as to what, how these TIF district revenues might be used. So you can create a committee. The other thing that the statute requires is that once you adopt the plan, assuming that the plan is going to have a life of at least 10 years, and the shortest one I've seen so far is 20 years. Each 10 years, the plan needs to be reviewed.
Can they change the plan mid-tip?
You can change it. So if you want to amend your plan, then you have to go through the whole process again, like you did adopting it. The other thing is, if you have an arrangement, like one of these credit enhancement agreements with a property owner, you can't change it that would disadvantage that credit enhancement. Yes.
Can you add a property to the TIF district once the plan is created, or do you have to change the whole plan?
You can add it, but it would be treated as like an amendment. So you'd go through the whole process of adding it. Typically what happens is when you create the districts, I think most municipalities in some ways, I would say maybe are slightly over-inclusive, including that as long as you can meet your 10% test. And so, you know, typically what most districts are aiming at, most districts are focused mostly on, you know, commercial, retail, industrial lots. You know, for the most part, you try to create a district that doesn't include a lot of single-family housing. I mean, this is not something for that. And you can, you know, your district lines can, even if it's contiguous, can kind of wrap around and kind of little gerrymandering. But so, but if you wanted to actually add a parcel, that would be considered an amendment.
Can have spot parcels around in the district.
Yeah, that gets back to the contiguous question. You can definitely have, if there was a particular parcel that was really kind of on its own, you could decide to create just a district for
If
that.
it's in amongst a developed area and there's just one parcel that's not developed.
Right. Yeah, you can do that, and you could create around it, and even if it included some parcels that were fully developed, that's okay. It doesn't really affect anything. I mean, and that's, I think, one of the most important things when putting these plans together is deciding on where you're gonna focus these districts and where you're gonna focus, what makes the most sense for the town. Where is development most likely to occur, or where would you like to encourage development, you know? So that, because this TIF districts that will get people's attention, because I think what the TIF district does is it sends a message to developers that effectively the town's willing to put some skin in the game to see the right kind of developments go on within their town. You know, and then like kind of the last page here is just kind of the next steps, what the town should think about, you know, what are your goals for the TIF district? Is it seen towns decide they're gonna use the TIF district to create a business park? Other towns want to promote kind of more dense multifamily housing. There might be a district, and I've seen this, where they just, you know, a developer comes in with a really large scale project and they do a single parcel district and the deal's cut that way. You know, so that there's all these things that should go into it. You know, the assessor, you're gonna have to figure out what's the original assessed value of all the properties at the time you create the district. And then you're typically doing some estimates as to assessment growth and things like that, which will all be in the plan or the policy. You know, it is, okay, around here, obviously, you know, with Montgomery Mill is probably the best example. In Windsor, it's kind of on the other side, more on the Bluefield side, but the Great Pond is the kind of, it's in their industrial park, but on the edges, there's multifamily in there, there's industry in there, and that's all done through a TIF district. Cheshire did one kind of in their north end over by 691 with a multi-parcel development. That was a good one because it sat right on the boundaries of Cheshire and Southington. And the property just was vacant forever. And the biggest reason was because there were no sewer and water to the area. So it made it very hard to develop. So the developer came in with plans that included single family housing, multifamily housing, retail, office space, different things like that. But really what the TIF was used for was, and this was the example, is to, you know, bring the sewer and water into that property, which the developer, once they had an agreement for how the TIF would be allocated, you know, is now going through and paying the upfront costs to bring that, you know, the developer's footing that bill rather than typically the town would, and with the developer knowing that as long as they develop the property like they told the town, they should generate enough incremental taxes to be able to repay themselves over time. So there's, you know, a variety of ways this can be used. It's you know, it's worth exploring. It's worth having a discussion as to what makes sense for the town of East Windsor.
So we've got a little less than 10 minutes. If anybody has any questions or comments about, you know, what we've heard.
Just a quick question. When your TIF plan, when the agreement is ended, whether it's 10 years or 20 years,
Yeah.
do the districts stay? Does it become a permanent district, or do they get dissolved, and when you have another project, you can create another TIF district?
At the end of the term, which is laid out in the plan and can be up to 50 years, at the end, the district just goes away. The good thing too is that the creation of the district doesn't create like another level of government or even like a mini government. At one point, what was happening in the state was that large-scale projects which wanted to use the TIF concept but didn't like the old TIF statute were each of them were getting special legislation, but it was set up in a way that basically created a district board, which was almost like another level of government. And then when I drafted this in 2015, we got rid of that and just had it all at the town level and have all the decisions made at the town level.
Other questions or comments? Going once? Everybody crystal clear, huh? Attorney Andrea, thank you very much. This was a very good conversation, and it's enlightening. I've seen a little bit of this before, but even in a few years since the last time I've seen it, it's changed and it's more granular, and I think it's exciting. So I appreciate you being here and taking time to share your knowledge with us.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you, everyone. And Jason, you know where to find me, so let's just come up. So take care. Thank you.
All right, thank you, everybody.